Hey guys, we're going to talk today about the first part of biology, which is the carbon and nitrogen cycles. Surely this isn't too much of a new deal for you, but we're going to go over it in a little bit more detail maybe than you have before. First thing is up here in the very top, you see essential question. By now you've probably heard of it before, but your essential question is how do biotic and abiotic factors influence the environment? And the learning target underneath it is explain the recycling of matter within an ecosystem. And honestly, right here it looks like the box that it's recording doesn't have the essential question, but don't worry, it'll be on the board. Alright, so again, carbon and nitrogen cycles. Important vocabulary for you guys to know. Remember, you'll have a Quizlet, an opportunity for you to have this and carry it with you forever and ever. Is carbon cycle, the greenhouse effect, what is recycling, and the nitrogen cycle. Probably familiar with all of it, so hopefully won't be much to talk about. So first thing, the carbon cycle. Alright, with any cycle, you know that you can start anywhere and end up going in a circle. That's why it's called a cycle, because it's cyclic. Alright, we'll start here at the fossils and fossil fuels. Okay, we all know that we burn fossil fuels. That's why if you go from there, you go up to the top right, where it is emitted into the air as CO2 through factories. So it goes from fossil fuels to factories, alright, which then burn it, create CO2 in the air. Through photosynthesis, plants pull the CO2 out of the air, which then could be eaten by animals. And then obviously if it eats, it poops, so it's going to poop out. And that goes back to where we started. But we can't forget about animal respiration, because when we breathe, we are animals in consideration of science, when we breathe out CO2. So CO2 goes back out to the air. But just like breathing, which is called respiration, as you can see, plants also respirate, so they also add CO2. So we have a factory adding CO2, we have plants adding CO2, we have animals adding CO2. Really, the only way to get CO2 out of the air is through photosynthesis. So you can see how sometimes this may be a lopsided cycle. In other words, there may be a lot more being added to our air than actually taken in, which is in fact our problem with the CO2 and carbon cycle. Alright, so this is the carbon cycle. Again, start wherever you want. I started with fossil fuels. We use fossil fuels to burn them in things like factories, which put it up into the air. Alright, animals breathe, they put it into the air. Plants breathe out, they pull it out in the air. They don't really breathe, but I'm just going to say that in generalization. Alright, plants through photosynthesis pull it out of the air. So without plants, we're not able to balance this carbon cycle. Which brings us to the next issue, which is the greenhouse effect. Alright, if you've ever seen a greenhouse, you know that there are there's glass around the outside, or plastic, that helps keep it warm. Okay, so if I drew our little Earth, fortunately it's blue here on the blue background. It's amazing Earth, I know. And I draw the sun. The sun comes down on the Earth through something called visible light. That's how we see it. Alright, but we know that when it hits the Earth, it turns into heat. Alright, so the heat bounces off the surface. Alright, but there is something that's like a blanket. Clouds help do it. And it helps hold that CO2 and things like that in. It's the ozone. Alright, as the sun goes through the ozone, it's untouched by the light, but the heat bounces off the Earth, hits the ozone, and bounces back to help keep a steady warmth. If you're a Boy Scout, or maybe just a person who likes to camp, you know that on days it's really clear outside, it's a lot colder. Alright, so this shows the extra heat. As we continue putting more CO2 in, it adds to that blanket, alright, which then makes it even, well, that's supposed to be gray, even more CO2 that can't escape, heat that can't escape. So, normally you have some released. So now you have more heat, and it kind of gets hotter and hotter and hotter, and that's what could lead to eventual climate change. Alright, and that's my awesome handwriting with my mouse, because, yeah, can't afford a tablet for some reason. So, climate change in general. So anyways, all right, so you start with, you have your blanket of ozone. It helps keep that heat in, but when we add more CO2, it doesn't let that heat escape, and it can eventually make the Earth hotter. You need to pause, rewind. All right, and last but not least is the nitrogen cycle. All right, there is more nitrogen in the air than there is oxygen. All right, it's 80%. 80% of our air is made up of nitrogen in the form of N2. Okay, so how do we get it out of the air? All right, basically, we're able to pull it out of the air using plants. All right, these guys right here. All right, those are plants. They pull it down in the air. A lot of them, they're called legumes that have fixing bacteria on their roots, like soybeans. Any type of bean is able to do it, and it brings nitrogen down into the ground where other plants can use it. When animals eat it, they digest it and they poop it back down, kind of like the carbon. All right, it's fixed now for the plants, other plants to use that don't have legumes. So these trees now can use it, and then when they respirate or when they're eaten, it is released and it can go back into the air. So nitrogen is a lot more difficult to understand. It's not as cyclic as a carbon cycle, but most of it's in the air. The only way for it to get pulled out of that ground, out of the air, is through legumes. Oh, and I can't forget one thing. Lightning. Lightning fixes nitrogen. So it goes from the air through legumes and lightning. Sorry. And then after the decaying matter is fixed, then other plants can actually use it, and then it continues in its cycle once they're eaten or grounds tore up, etc. So again, if you don't understand, you can pause it, rewind. Please fill out your reading guides, and we'll talk about it in class.